I know you. You're the man who saved my daughter's life. Those words stopped Mark cold as he stared at the beautiful woman standing on his doorstep. How could his blind date possibly know about that day at the hospital, the day he thought no one would ever discover his secret? But before he could respond, his phone rang. It was the school calling about his son. Mark Thompson hadn't been on a date in 5 years, not since losing his wife to cancer and becoming a single father to their son, Ethan. At 42, he'd resigned himself to a life of work, parenting, and occasional lonely nights after Ethan went to bed. His sister had been trying to set him up for years, but he always found an excuse. This time, however, she'd been relentless. Her name is Claire. She's a pediatric nurse, divorced, no kids. Just coffee, Mark. 1 hour of your life. He'd finally agreed, but when Claire suggested they meet at his place first, she lived nearby and thought it would be easier, Mark felt a flutter of anxiety. His modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs wasn't exactly a showplace, but he'd spent the morning cleaning, with Ethan's reluctant help. "Dad, why are you so nervous?" "It's just coffee," Ethan had asked, watching his father change shirts for the 3rd time. "I'm not nervous," Mark lied, adjusting his collar. "I just want to make a good impression." "Because you like her already?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, looking far too perceptive for a 10-year-old. "I haven't even met her yet," Mark replied, ruffling his son's hair. "Now go finish your homework before Mrs. Garcia picks you up for your playdate." When the doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m., Mark took a deep breath and opened the door. The woman standing there took his breath away, not just because of her striking beauty, with auburn hair and warm brown eyes, but because of the strange feeling of familiarity that washed over him. And then she whispered those words that made his blood run cold, "I know you. You're the man who saved my daughter's life." Before Mark could process what was happening, his phone rang with the school's ringtone. His heart raced as he excused himself to answer. Ethan had fallen during recess and needed to be picked up. The school nurse suspected a sprained ankle. "I'm so sorry," Mark said to Claire, already reaching for his keys. "My son." "I'll drive you," Claire said firmly. "You're too shaken to drive safely." During the tense car ride, Mark's mind raced. How did this woman know about his anonymous bone marrow donation 3 years ago? He'd specifically requested to remain anonymous, wanting no recognition for doing what anyone would do. The little girl had been just 6 years old, fighting leukemia, and Mark had been a perfect match. The hospital had strict protocols about donor privacy. No one was supposed to know. At the school, they found Ethan sitting in the nurse's office, his face tear-streaked but brave. To Mark's surprise, Claire knelt beside his son with professional confidence. "Hi there. I'm Claire. I'm a nurse, and I'm going to take a look at that ankle if that's okay with you and your dad." Ethan nodded, and Mark watched in amazement as Claire gently examined his son's ankle, her touch both professional and tender. "Good news, it's not broken, just a mild sprain. Ice, elevation, and rest for a few days should do the trick." On the drive home, with Ethan in the back seat clutching an ice pack, Mark couldn't contain his questions any longer. "How did you know about the donation?" "No one was supposed to know." Claire kept her eyes on the road. "My daughter, Sophie, received bone marrow from an anonymous donor 3 years ago. All we knew was that he was a local man in his late 30s. The donation saved her life." She paused, her knuckles widening on the steering wheel. "I never thought I'd find you." "But how did you know it was me?" Mark asked, bewildered. Claire glanced at him. "I didn't. Not until I saw the scar on your wrist when you opened the door. The harvest site. I've seen enough of them to recognize it instantly. So this wasn't really a blind date set up by my sister?" Mark felt a strange mix of confusion and disappointment. "It was," Claire assured him. "Your sister Jenny and I work at the same hospital. She has no idea about the connection." When she described you, I thought maybe, just maybe, but I wasn't sure until I saw you. Back at Mark's house, after settling Ethan on the couch with his favorite superhero movie, Claire and Mark sat at the kitchen table with the coffee they'd originally planned to share at a cafe. I've been searching for 3 years, Claire admitted. Not actively, they told me it was impossible, but I always wondered about the person who saved Sophie without ever asking for recognition or thanks. Mark stared into his coffee. I didn't do it for recognition. When I registered as a donor in college, I never thought I'd actually match with someone. Then when I got the call. He trailed off, remembering. My wife had just died. Helping someone else's child felt like. I don't know, like maybe it balanced the scales somehow. I'd like you to meet Sophie, Claire said suddenly. She asks about her cell buddy all the time. That's what we call you. She draws pictures of what she thinks you might look like. Mark felt his throat tighten. I'd like that. And I'm sure Ethan would too. From the living room, Ethan called out, Dad. Can Claire stay for dinner? She knows all about my ankle and stuff. Mark looked at Claire questioningly. Their coffee date had turned into something entirely unexpected. I'd love to, she replied, her eyes never leaving Mark's. But only if your dad promises this still counts as our first date. 2 weeks later, Mark stood nervously outside Claire's front door, a bouquet of daisies in hand. Their second date, their first official one without medical emergencies or revelations, was about to begin. But what made his heart race wasn't just seeing Claire again, it was meeting Sophie. The door opened, and there stood a small girl with Claire's auburn hair and a bright smile that lit up her entire face. Are you my cell buddy? She asked without preamble. Mark knelt down to her level. I guess I am. Sophie threw her arms around his neck with the uninhibited affection only children can offer. Thank you for saving my life, she whispered. Over Sophie's shoulder, Mark saw Claire watching them, tears glistening in her eyes. In that moment, something shifted in his heart, a space that had been closed since his wife's death cracked open just enough to let in a ray of light. The evening was filled with laughter as Sophie showed Mark her drawings and science projects, while Claire prepared dinner. It felt strangely familiar, like coming home to a place he'd never been before. After Sophie went to bed, Claire and Mark sat on her porch swing, the night air cool around them. I never thought I'd feel this way again, Mark admitted. After Lisa died, I was sure that part of my life was over. Claire's hand found his in the darkness. Life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it? 3 years ago, a stranger saved my daughter without ever knowing her name. Now here we are. Here we are, Mark echoed, squeezing her hand. 6 months later, Mark stood in his living room, watching as Ethan and Sophie built an elaborate fort out of blankets and furniture. The two children had bonded immediately, Sophie taking on the role of protective older sister despite being a year younger. They're good together, Claire said, coming up beside him and slipping her arm around his waist. They are, Mark agreed. Ethan hasn't been this happy in a long time. The past months had been a whirlwind of family outings, quiet dinners after the children were asleep, and long conversations that often lasted until dawn. Mark had fallen in love with Claire's strength, her compassion, and the way she understood his grief without trying to erase it. But tonight was different. Tonight, Mark had a question to ask. After the children were finally asleep, Sophie in the guest room that had gradually accumulated her belongings over months of sleepovers, Mark and Claire sat on the back porch, a bottle of wine between them. I've been thinking, Mark began, his heart pounding. That sounds dangerous, Claire teased, but her eyes were serious. Our lease renewals are both coming up next month, he continued. And I was wondering if you and Sophie might want to make this arrangement more permanent. Claire set down her wine glass. Are you asking us to move in with you? I'm asking if we could find a new place. Together. Somewhere with enough room for all of us, maybe a yard for a dog. Ethan's been asking for one for years. Mark Thompson, Claire said slowly, are you creating a family with me? I think we already are a family, he replied. I'm just suggesting we make it official. Claire's eyes filled with tears. There's something I need to tell you first. Something I should have told you months ago. Mark felt a chill of apprehension. What is it? Sophie's leukemia, there's a 15% chance of recurrence. Her doctors are optimistic, but... She couldn't finish. Mark took her hands in his. Claire, listen to me. When Lisa got sick, I learned that none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. All we can do is love each other today, with everything we have. And if it comes back? Claire whispered. Then we'll face it together. All four of us. 1 year to the day after their first meeting, Mark and Claire stood in the backyard of their new home, surrounded by friends and family. Ethan and Sophie stood beside them, both children beaming with pride in their formal attire. As they exchanged vows, Mark couldn't help but marvel at the strange path that had led them here. How a single act of kindness, performed anonymously in a moment of grief, had circled back to bring him the greatest joy he could imagine. Later, as their guests mingled and the children chased each other across the lawn, Claire found Mark standing alone, watching their new family with wonder. Penny for your thoughts, she said, slipping her hand into his. I was just thinking about that day you showed up at my door, Mark replied. How terrified I was to let someone new into our lives. And now? Now I can't imagine our lives any other way. He pulled her close. You know, when Lisa was dying, she made me promise I'd find happiness again someday. I never believed it was possible until you whispered those words on my doorstep. Claire rested her head against his shoulder. Some might call it coincidence. I call it fate. Across the yard, Sophie and Ethan had gathered their friends for an impromptu soccer game, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. Their family wasn't perfect, there were still difficult days, moments of grief, and the shadow of Sophie's health concerns, but it was real and whole in a way Mark had never thought possible again. Hey, Claire said suddenly. Did I ever tell you that the day before your sister suggested setting us up, Sophie had drawn a picture of her cell buddy that looked remarkably like you? Mark raised an eyebrow. Really? Complete with the little gray at your temples that you hate so much, Claire laughed. When I saw you standing in that doorway, I almost couldn't speak. It was like seeing a ghost, or a miracle. Maybe a little of both, Mark said, pulling her close for a kiss as their children's laughter surrounded them like music. If you enjoyed this story of hope, second chances, and the unexpected ways love finds us, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that remind us how small acts of kindness can change lives forever. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a whisper and a moment of recognition that changes everything.
White waitress dumps water on black mafia boss's pregnant wife without knowing. 7 minutes later. She regrets it. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night when everything changed. Simone, a pregnant black woman in an expensive designer dress, sat alone at a corner table, nervously checking her phone. She'd been waiting for 20 minutes, clearly uncomfortable as other diners stared and whispered. Her hand instinctively moved to her 7-month belly, feeling her baby kick, as if sensing her mother's distress. That's when Ashley, a white waitress with a chip on her shoulder, made her move. Without warning, Ashley dumped an entire pitcher of ice water across Simone's $3,000 dress. The freezing water soaked through to her skin as Ashley leaned in close and said with pure venom, "Oops, my bad. Maybe you should stick to places where you actually belong instead of pretending to be something you're not." The entire restaurant went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze mid-air. Simone sat there 7 months pregnant, water dripping from her ruined designer outfit onto the marble floor. Her hands trembled as she felt the cold water seeping through to her skin, and for a moment she worried about her baby. The humiliation burned deeper than the cold water ever could. But instead of breaking down, Simone's eyes flashed with controlled fury. She stood up slowly, water still cascading from her dress, and looked Ashley dead in the eye. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer effort it took to contain her rage and protect her unborn child from the stress. "You have no idea what you just did," Simone said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a weight that made everyone lean forward to hear. Then something incredible happened. Simone reached into her purse with shaking hands, pulled out exact change for her untouched meal, and placed it on the table along with a $500 tip. As she walked toward the exit with her head held high, those who looked closely could see the tears she was fighting back, the way her breath caught in her throat as she tried to maintain her dignity. Ashley stood there in shock. But deep inside, a tiny voice whispered that something felt terribly wrong about what she'd just done. Ashley turned to her coworkers, smirking with satisfaction to hide the growing unease in her chest. "Finally got rid of her," she whispered, thinking she'd won. But her hands were shaking slightly as she cleaned up the water, and she couldn't quite meet her coworkers' eyes. But Ashley had no idea what was waiting outside. As Simone approached the black SUV parked in front of the restaurant, a dangerous-looking man stepped out. This was Gerald, and when he saw his wife's condition, the water stains on her dress, the barely contained tears in her eyes, the way she was trembling, his expression shifted to something that would have terrified anyone who witnessed it. "What happened?" Gerald asked, his voice deadly calm as he gently helped his pregnant wife into the passenger seat, his hands tender despite the rage building inside him. Simone looked back at the restaurant, then at her husband, her voice breaking as she said 4 words that would change everything. "Someone needs to learn respect." If you want to see how this racist waitress's world completely falls apart when she discovers who she really messed with, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. And drop a comment telling me, have you ever witnessed discrimination like this in real life? Ashley thought she'd humiliated someone powerless, but she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Ashley Morrison was 26 years old, a single mother working double shifts at Charlie dinner just to survive. She was bitter, exhausted, and barely scraping by in a cramped studio apartment where the walls seemed to close in on her every night. 3 weeks earlier, she'd been passed over for a promotion that would have changed her life, and that rejection had been eating away at her soul like acid. Every night, she lay awake wondering why her life had become such a struggle, why everyone else seemed to have it so easy, while she worked herself to the bone for pennies. But this wasn't Ashley's first racist attack. For months, she'd been targeting well-dressed black customers, making snide comments disguised as jokes, assuming they were all pretending to have money they didn't possess. Each time she did it, she felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, as if bringing someone else down could somehow lift her up from her own misery. Management turned a blind eye because Ashley knew how to play the victim when complaints were filed, tears streaming down her face as she claimed she was being unfairly targeted. What Ashley didn't know was that the woman she'd just humiliated was Dr. Simone Cruz, a 32-year-old Harvard-educated pediatric surgeon who saved children's lives for a living. Despite being worth $50 million, she'd remained humble and kind, never forgetting her own humble beginnings. Gerald Cruz, Simone's husband, was a legitimate businessman who owned construction companies, security firms, and real estate across 3 states. His empire spanned dozens of businesses, all legally operated, but there were whispers about his deeper connections. Phone calls that ended abruptly when Simone entered the room. Meetings with men who spoke in code and whose eyes held secrets. Gerald had fought his way up from nothing, building his fortune for Charlie Dinner Restaurant catered to millionaires and celebrities, the kind of place where a single meal cost more than Ashley made in a week. The restaurant couldn't afford to lose customers, but Ashley didn't care. Her bitterness had consumed her ability to think rationally, and she took out her frustrations on anyone she deemed an easy target. Within hours, Ashley was celebrating like she'd won the lottery. She bragged to coworkers about how she'd put that woman in her place, her eyes bright with malicious joy that masked the growing emptiness inside her. She even posted on social media, "Had to teach some fake rich people a lesson tonight about trying to eat where they don't belong. Some people need to learn their place." The likes and supportive comments from her friends fed her ego, making her feel vindicated in her cruelty, but deep down, something felt hollow about the victory. But while Ashley celebrated, Gerald was making quiet inquiries, his jaw clenched with barely controlled rage that threatened to consume him. His associates were ready for immediate violence, but Gerald restrained them with trembling hands. "My wife handles her own battles, but a disrespect to my family will be handled by me." He began learning everything about Ashley Morrison, his investigation fueled by a cold fury that terrified even his closest allies. He was ready for justice, and Ashley had no idea who she was up against. All she thought was she humiliated a black woman, not knowing who the woman's husband was. The stress from the incident sent Simone to the hospital that same night. Early contractions racked her body as she sobbed in Gerald's arms, not from physical pain, but from the emotional trauma of being degraded in front of a room full of strangers. When Gerald got that call from the doctor, his controlled fury transformed into something far more dangerous. Someone hadn't just disrespected his wife. They'd threatened his unborn child's life, and that was absolutely unforgivable. Gerald discovered through his vast network that he indirectly owned the building Charlie Dinner operated in through shell companies. His construction company had built the restaurant 5 years ago. His security firm protected half the businesses in the district. Gerald's web of influence was vast and hidden, touching every aspect of the community in ways most people never realized. And now every thread of that web would be used to teach Ashley about consequences. Ashley's vulnerability ran deeper than anyone knew. Her ex-husband owed money to loan sharks, dangerous men who didn't accept late payments and whose threats were growing more violent by the day. Her sick mother needed expensive medication that insurance wouldn't cover. Medication that kept her alive, but drained Ashley's already meager resources. Her 8-year-old son Tyler needed surgery she couldn't afford, a surgery that could save his life but remained out of reach. She was drowning in debt and desperation, lashing out at innocent people because she couldn't handle her own pain and felt powerless against the forces crushing her spirit. The connections ran even deeper than Gerald initially realized. Ashley's ex-husband had borrowed money from one of Gerald's associates 6 months ago. Her mother's life-saving medication came from a pharmacy in a building Gerald owned through a subsidiary company. Ashley's son went to Washington Elementary, a school where Simone volunteered as a doctor every Friday, spending her free time healing children while their mother spread hate and ignorance. Gerald was building a complete picture of Ashley's life, and what he was discovering was a woman so desperate and vulnerable that destroying her would be almost too easy. But Gerald wasn't interested in easy victories. He was interested in justice, and justice required precision, patience, and a lesson that would never be forgotten. 3 weeks after the incident, Ashley's world started crumbling in ways that seemed like cruel coincidences, but were actually Gerald Cruz executing the most calculated takedown imaginable. Her shifts at Charlie Dinner got cut from 40 hours to 25, and when she begged her manager for an explanation, the tears in her eyes were real for the first time in months. The restaurant was hemorrhaging customers after the viral video spread across every social media platform. High-profile clients were canceling reservations with voices full of disgust and moral outrage. Her apartment rent mysteriously increased by $400 a month. When Ashley called the building management, sobbing into the phone and pleading for mercy, they cited new policies and market adjustments with cold indifference. What Ashley didn't know was that Gerald's real estate company had quietly acquired her building through a shell corporation just 2 weeks after the incident. Policy changes were completely within their legal rights, and Gerald's lawyers had made sure every document was airtight. Her car insurance premium suddenly spiked by 60% after a routine review revealed she was now classified as a high-risk driver. When Ashley screamed at the customer service representative, demanding explanations that never came, her voice cracked with desperation. The insurance company claimed they'd discovered previous incidents that warranted the increase, incidents that existed only in carefully crafted paperwork that Gerald's people had expertly fabricated. Within a month, Ashley was drowning in a sea of financial ruin. She couldn't understand why everything was falling apart simultaneously, why the universe seemed to be conspiring against her. She picked up extra shifts wherever she could find them, working as a catering server, cleaning offices at night, doing anything to earn money, but her body was exhausted and her spirit was breaking. Somehow, no matter how hard she worked, money became tighter than ever. Her mother's medication costs kept rising due to supply chain issues. Her son's medical bills were piling up as his condition worsened. Her ex-husband's debt collectors were calling more frequently, their voices becoming more threatening with each conversation. Ashley started blaming everyone for her mounting troubles, tears of frustration streaming down her face during sleepless nights. The restaurant management was incompetent and unfair. The apartment building was run by greedy landlords who preyed on struggling tenants. The insurance company was corrupt and evil. She pointed angry fingers at anyone and everyone except herself, never once considering that her actions might have consequences that stretched far beyond that single moment of cruelty. Meanwhile, Gerald was orchestrating every move with surgical precision, his heart cold with calculated revenge but burning with protective love for his family. He didn't need violence or direct threats. He had something far more powerful, influence woven through legitimate business channels like an invisible spiderweb, and the patience to watch Ashley's world collapse slowly and completely. But Simone discovered what her husband was doing, and instead of being horrified, she felt a dark satisfaction that surprised her. "I want to make sure she understands exactly what happens when someone disrespects our family," she said. Gerald looked up from his papers, surprised by the ice in his wife's voice. He could see something had fundamentally changed in Simone. The gentle doctor was still there, but underneath burned a fire he'd never seen before. "I thought you'd want me to stop. I thought this would be too much for you." Simone was consumed by emotions that warred within her heart, but revenge was winning. The humiliation still burned fresh in her memory, the shock of cold water, the racist words, the laughter of other diners, the stress that had put her in the hospital and threatened their unborn child. "She's a single mother with a sick child," Simone said, her voice devoid of the compassion that usually defined her. "Good. Maybe now she'll understand what it feels like to be powerless, to watch someone you love suffer while others decide your fate." "Simone?" Gerald's voice carried a note of concern. He'd wanted justice for his wife, but seeing this cold fury in her eyes unsettled even him. "Are you sure about this? Once we go down this path, there's no coming back." Simone's voice cracked with bitter emotion, her own tears falling as she remembered the humiliation that still haunted her dreams. "She poured water on me while I was pregnant, called me names in front of strangers, tried to destroy my dignity based on the color of my skin. She made me feel like nothing, Gerald, like I didn't deserve to exist in the same space as her. There's no such thing as too far when someone tries to strip away your humanity." Gerald watched his wife with growing unease. The woman he'd married was kind, compassionate, dedicated to healing, but the woman sitting before him now had been forged in the fire of humiliation and hatred, and he realized Ashley's racism had done more than hurt Simone. It had fundamentally changed her. "What do you want me to do?" Gerald asked quietly. Simone's smile was sharp as a blade. "I want her to lose everything, just like she tried to make me lose my dignity. I want her to understand that actions have consequences." "And Gerald?" She looked at him with eyes that held no trace of mercy. "I want her to know it was me. I want her to know that the woman she thought was beneath her was the one who brought her entire world crashing down." For the first time since this began, Gerald felt a chill run down his spine. He'd unleashed something in his wife that might be impossible to control. and he wondered if Ashley Morrison had any idea that the gentle doctor she'd attacked had become her most dangerous enemy. The stress of the earlier dilemma was taking its toll on Simone's already fragile pregnancy. The complications returned with a vengeance. More contractions that left her gasping, more trips to the hospital that filled Gerald with terror. Her doctor issued increasingly stern warnings about premature labor, about the very real danger that stress posed to both mother and unborn child. And all this happened because of the humiliation she received from Ashley. When Gerald received another emergency call from the hospital, his hands shook as he drove through traffic to reach his wife. Something fundamental shifted inside him. His protective instincts went into overdrive, consuming every rational thought with the primal need to eliminate any threat to his family. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This wasn't just about honor or revenge. Someone's actions were now actively threatening his child's life, and that made everything personal in a way that terrified even him. Gerald realized with crystal clarity that Ashley's racism hadn't just humiliated his wife, it had created a devastating chain reaction of stress that was now endangering his unborn daughter's very existence. Every contraction Simone experienced, every tear she shed in fear and pain, every sleepless night they spent worried about premature labor, could be traced directly back to that moment when Ashley decided to pour water on a pregnant woman because of her skin color. The revenge that came after will shock you to your core. But first, do you think Gerald's systematic destruction of Ashley's life was justified, or did he go too far? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're loving this story, smash that like button, because the confrontation that's about to happen will blow your mind. 3 weeks after that fateful night at Charlie dinner, Ashley's life became a living nightmare that seemed to have no end. It started with a phone call that shattered her world completely and forever. Ashley's 8-year-old son Tyler collapsed at school during recess, clutching his small chest and gasping for air that wouldn't come. The panic in the school nurse's voice made Ashley's blood run cold as she dropped everything and raced to the hospital, her heart pounding with terror. The emergency room doctors delivered news that felt like a death sentence. Tyler needed immediate heart surgery to repair a congenital defect that had suddenly become life-threatening. Without the operation within 48 hours, her precious son could die. And the thought of losing him sent Ashley into a spiral of absolute despair that threatened to consume her sanity. The surgery cost $68,000, a number so impossibly large that Ashley felt dizzy just hearing it. Her insurance, already stretched thin, covered barely half of the astronomical cost. She needed $34,000 she absolutely didn't have and had no way of obtaining, and the hospital made it clear they wouldn't operate without payment guarantees. Ashley spent hours on the phone, begging, pleading, sobbing to anyone who would listen, but doors slammed shut in her face one after another. While she was processing this unimaginable terror, her phone rang again with news that felt like another dagger to her heart. Charlie Dinner's owner delivered the final professional blow with cold indifference that cut through her like ice. "Ashley, you're fired. Effective immediately. Don't bother coming back." He discovered that she'd been systematically driving away wealthy customers for months, and the viral video of her racist attack had cost the restaurant over $200,000 in canceled reservations and permanently lost business. Ashley's desperate pleas about her son's life-threatening condition fell on deaf ears that had no room for mercy. Then her mother's pharmacy called with news that felt like watching her world burn. The medication keeping her mother alive had been abruptly discontinued by her insurance company due to policy changes. The monthly cost was now $4,000 out of pocket, money Ashley didn't have and never would. She hung up the phone and wept until she had no tears left, feeling like she was drowning in an ocean of despair with no hope of rescue. Her landlord served eviction papers with a smug smile that made her stomach turn. She had 7 days to pay the increased rent, plus mounting late fees, or she'd be homeless on the streets with a dying child and a sick mother who needed constant care. Ashley found herself in the sterile, fluorescent-lit pediatric wing of St. Mary's Hospital. holding Tyler's small cold hand as he lay unconscious, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with the rhythm of his struggling heart. Her own heart broke watching her innocent child suffer, while she felt utterly powerless to save him. Dr. Matthews, a distinguished pediatric surgeon who looked at Tyler's chart with grave concern. His expression was serious as he explained the complexity of Tyler's condition and the urgent need for surgery. "I won't lie to you, Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Matthews said, his voice heavy with professional concern. "Your son's condition is critical. We need to operate within the next 24 hours, but the surgery is complex and expensive. The total cost will be $68,000. Ashley's world tilted dangerously as the astronomical figure hit her like a physical blow. I don't have that kind of money. My insurance only covers half. Please, there has to be something." Dr. Matthews looked at her with sympathy. "I understand your situation. There might be one option. There's a businessman in the city who sometimes helps with medical cases like this, Gerald Cruz. His foundation has been known to assist families in desperate situations. It's your best shot at getting the funding you need." Ashley's first instinct was to grasp at any hope, any lifeline that could save her son's life. She didn't recognize the name, but if this man could help Tyler, she would beg on her knees if necessary. "How do I reach him?" Ashley whispered, her voice breaking with desperate hope. "His office is downtown, Cruz Construction and Development." "But Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Matthews warned gently, "these decisions aren't made lightly. You'll need to present your case directly to him." 2 hours later, Ashley found herself in the gleaming lobby of Cruz Construction and Development, her hands shaking as she clutched Tyler's medical records. The receptionist, after hearing about the medical emergency, surprisingly told her that Mr. Cruz would see her immediately. When Ashley was escorted into the executive office, a dangerous-looking man stood with his back to her, looking out at the city's skyline. When he turned around, Ashley's blood ran cold with recognition and terror. It was Gerald, the same man she'd seen outside the restaurant 3 weeks ago. "So," Gerald said, his voice deadly calm as he gestured for her to sit, "You're Ashley Morrison, the woman who dumped water on my pregnant wife and told her she didn't belong in a nice restaurant." Ashley's world collapsed around her as the horrible truth crashed down like an avalanche. She's your wife, sir? So you've been the one who—" "Yes, I've been systematically dismantling your life piece by piece since you decided to attack my wife based on the color of her skin," Gerald finished, settling behind his massive desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "Yes, that would be me." Ashley broke down completely, sobbing so violently that her whole body shook. "My son, he's dying. He needs surgery. I know what I did was unforgivable, but please don't punish him for my mistakes." Gerald studied her for a long moment, taking in her completely broken state, her absolute desperation, her total understanding of how powerless she was. "Your son needs $68,000 to live, and you came to me for help. Do you see the irony in that, Mrs. Morrison?" "Please," Ashley whispered through her tears. "I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly, I'll work for you for free, I'll spend the rest of my life making up for what I did. Just please don't let my innocent child die because of my stupidity." Gerald leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "You assumed my wife didn't belong in that restaurant because of her skin color. You poured water on a pregnant woman and tried to humiliate her in front of strangers. And now you're sitting in my office, begging the husband of the woman you attacked to save your child's life." Ashley could barely speak through her devastation. I know how this looks. I know I don't deserve your help. But Tyler, he's just a little boy. He never hurt anyone. Please." "Your son's surgery," Gerald said finally, his voice carrying the weight of absolute power over her fate, "will cost exactly what you cost me in destroyed business. Stress-related medical bills for my wife, and the damage to my family's peace of mind. $68,000 seems like a small price to pay for the lesson you're about to learn about consequences." Ashley realized with crushing clarity that she was completely at the mercy of the man whose wife she had tried to destroy, and her son's life hung in the balance of whether Gerald Cruz had any mercy left to give. Then, Simone entered the office to see Ashley sobbing. Ashley broke down completely, turning to Simone. sobbing so violently that her whole body shook with the force of her grief and terror. "I'm so sorry. I was desperate, angry, drowning in my own problems. I thought you were pretending to be rich. I thought you didn't deserve to be there, I thought." Her words came out in broken gasps between soul-crushing sobs. "So you decided racism was the answer to your problems?" Simone's voice remained steady, but Ashley could hear the deep hurt that still lived in her words. "You decided to humiliate a pregnant woman because you were having a bad day and needed someone to blame for your pain?" Ashley could barely speak through her tears, her voice a broken whisper filled with desperation. "Please. Please don't hurt my son. He's innocent. He never did anything wrong. Please don't punish him for my mistakes." Gerald studied her for a long, tense moment, taking in her completely broken state, her absolute desperation, her total understanding of how powerless she was in this moment. Ashley realized with crushing clarity that she'd been destroyed by people who were infinitely better human beings than she had ever been, and that realization cut deeper than any physical punishment ever could. Simone, looking at Ashley, felt her compassionate heart come back. She turned to her husband to request they help her. So Gerald made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "I'm going to save your son's life," Gerard told Ashley. "But then you are going to have a very serious conversation with me," as he gave her the money. Tyler's surgery took 8 grueling hours that felt like 8 years to Ashley. When the surgery was finally over and Tyler was stable, breathing steadily in recovery, it completely shattered her understanding of how the people she humiliated could save her son's lives. She collapsed in the hospital hallway, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, her cries echoing off the sterile walls. 3 days later, Simone visited Ashley in Tyler's recovery room. Ashley had barely eaten, barely slept, consumed by guilt and self-hatred so profound it was making her physically ill. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. "Mrs. Morrison," Simone said gently, sitting beside Tyler's bed, where Ashley had been keeping constant vigil like a guardian angel afraid to leave her post. "We need to talk about what happens next." Ashley couldn't even look at her, shame burning in her chest like acid. "I keep thinking about your baby," she whispered, her voice raw from crying. "When I poured that water on you, you were 7 months pregnant. I could have hurt your child. I could have caused you to lose your baby because I was angry and bitter and couldn't handle my own pain. What kind of monster does that make me?" Simone's own eyes filled with tears, not for herself, but for the utterly broken woman sitting before her, a woman whose soul had been stripped bare and found wanting. "Ashley, look at me." When Ashley finally raised her eyes, Simone saw something she didn't expect to find. Genuine remorse so deep and transformative it had changed Ashley's entire face. The hatred was gone, burned away by suffering, and replaced by a raw pain that was almost unbearable to witness. "You have a choice to make," Simone said, her voice gentle but carrying the weight of absolute finality. Ashley's terror was absolute, but somehow she found her voice through the fear. "I deserve it. I deserve all that has happened to me. For what I did to you. There's no excuse. There's no justification. I'm a terrible person who hurt an innocent woman because of the color of her skin." "Or," Simone continued, her voice heavy with the weight of offering grace to someone who didn't deserve it, "you can choose redemption. But this isn't just about making a public apology or going through the motions of change. This is about fundamentally transforming who you are at your very core. It's about facing the ugliness inside your soul and choosing to become someone worthy of your son's love and respect." Ashley's public apology became a viral moment of raw human vulnerability that moved millions of people to tears and sparked conversations about racism and redemption across the country. Standing outside Charlie Dinner where her journey into darkness had begun, Ashley didn't just read from prepared remarks written by lawyers. She spoke from a heart that had been completely broken open and examined in the harsh light of consequences. 3 weeks ago, I poured ice water on a pregnant black woman because I assumed she didn't belong in an upscale restaurant. But the truth is so much worse than that simple sentence can convey, Ashley said, tears streaming down her face as cameras recorded every word. I didn't just assume she didn't belong. I wanted to hurt her. I wanted to humiliate her, because I was drowning in my own failures, and it felt good to make someone else feel as small and worthless as I felt inside. Her voice broke completely, raw emotion making her words barely audible. Dr. Simone Cruz is a pediatric surgeon who saves children's lives every single day. She's worth $50 million but volunteers at free clinics. She's everything I pretended she wasn't, everything I could never be. But even if she had been poor, even if she had been struggling exactly like me, what I did would still be completely unforgivable. Ashley looked directly into the camera, her eyes red and swollen but blazing with desperate determination. I poisoned my own son with my hatred. He's 8 years old, and he was learning from me that it's okay to treat people badly because of their skin color. The woman I tried to destroy with my racism saved his life, and I almost ruined his chance to become a good person by teaching him to hate. She paused, struggling to compose herself as emotion threatened to overwhelm her completely. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life proving that people can change, that the worst parts of ourselves don't have to define us forever, that love can grow in soil poisoned by hate. Ashley didn't just attend diversity training. She threw herself into it with the desperate intensity of someone trying to save her own soul from damnation. The first session broke her all over again when she heard story after story of people who'd experienced exactly what she had put Simone through. A successful black businessman talked about being followed in stores by security guards who assumed he was a thief. A Latina doctor described being mistaken for cleaning staff by patients who couldn't believe someone with her skin color could have a medical degree. A black mother shared through tears how her children had already experienced racism at school, coming home crying because classmates said they didn't belong. Ashley realized with sickening clarity that she'd been part of a vast system of cruelty that stretched far beyond her single act of hatred, a system that caused pain every single day to innocent people who just wanted to live their lives with dignity. At the Center for Pregnant Women, Ashley met Maria, a young black mother who reminded her painfully of Simone. Maria was scared, alone, and struggling to afford prenatal care for the baby growing inside her. When Ashley first approached to help, Maria's instinctive guardedness broke Ashley's heart. She recognized the wariness of someone who'd been hurt before by people who looked just like Ashley. "I know you have no reason to trust me," Ashley told Maria, her voice thick with emotion and humility. "But I want to help because I need to prove to myself that I can be better than the person I used to be. I need to learn how to heal instead of hurt." Slowly, over weeks of small acts of genuine kindness and care, Maria began to trust Ashley. The day Maria gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl, she asked Ashley to be in the delivery room with her. When Ashley held that perfect black baby in her arms, tears streaming down her face, as she looked into innocent eyes that held no prejudice, she finally understood the full magnitude of what she had almost destroyed when she attacked a pregnant woman carrying a child just like this one. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. But the emotions that drove Ashley's new life ran even deeper than before. She had become a fierce advocate for equality in the service industry. But more than that, she'd become someone her son could look up to with genuine pride instead of inherited shame. When Simone and Gerald walked into Bella Vista Restaurant 6 months later, where Ashley was now working with their newborn daughter Isabella sleeping peacefully in her carrier, Ashley's emotions threatened to overwhelm her completely. This was the moment she'd been both desperately hoping for and absolutely dreading. Her heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety, gratitude, and overwhelming love for the family that had chosen mercy over destruction. "Dr. and Mr. Cruz," Ashley said, her voice steady but her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy and gratitude. "Welcome to Bella Vista. It's an honor to serve you tonight." Simone looked at Ashley, really looked at her with eyes that seemed to see into her very soul, and saw someone completely transformed from the inside out. The bitter, angry woman was gone, burned away by suffering, and replaced by someone radiating genuine warmth and hard-earned wisdom that came from walking through fire and choosing to emerge as gold instead of ash. "Ashley," Simone said softly, her voice carrying forgiveness that Ashley was still learning to accept. "How are you doing?" "I'm becoming someone my son can be proud of," Ashley replied, her voice full of quiet determination and overwhelming gratitude that threatened to spill over into tears. "Every single day, I'm working to become someone who deserves the incredible grace you showed me when I deserved nothing but consequences." Ashley began training new staff members. Every person who walks through that door is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's everything, Ashley told the new waiters, her voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, paid for with blood, sweat, and tears. "When I was drowning in my own pain, I tried to drag someone else down with me. I almost destroyed an innocent family because I couldn't handle my own failures and needed someone to blame." The young waitress asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper, "But what if you really don't think someone belongs here?" Ashley's response came from the deepest part of her transformed heart, her voice breaking with emotion as she spoke truth learned through devastating loss. "Then you remember that love is always the answer. Always. Every single time. The moment you think someone doesn't belong somewhere because of how they look, you've already lost your own humanity and forgotten that we're all just people trying to make it through this difficult world together." She looked around the room at faces representing every ethnicity, every background, every story of struggle and triumph. Gerald Cruz could have destroyed me completely and been justified in doing it. Dr. Simone Cruz could have let my son die and no one would have blamed her. Instead, they taught me that redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the hard, painful work of becoming worthy of it. Ashley's voice broke with emotion one final time as she shared the lesson that had saved her soul. "The woman I was died in that hospital room when I realized what my hatred had cost me. The woman I am now was born from their mercy. And every single day I choose to honor that gift by making sure no one else has to learn these lessons the way I did, through loss, pain, and the devastating realization that hate destroys everything it touches, especially the person who carries it." The cycle of prejudice wasn't just broken. It was transformed into a cycle of love, understanding, and genuine human connection that rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Ashley Morrison learned that the most powerful force in the universe isn't hatred or revenge. It's the courage to choose love, even when you've been given every reason to choose hate, and the strength to keep choosing it every single day for the rest of your life. That was the power of true redemption. It didn't just change the person who received it, it changed everyone they touched for the rest of their lives, creating an endless chain of healing that stretched far beyond what any of them could see. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.